Hey, everybody. It's Friday afternoon, so needless to say, this is the TRU Community Gathering. Um, I'm wondering how many of you actually have been following us on YouTube. If you haven't been, please do. Don't let me stop you. Uh, we do this every Friday. We've been doing it since April 17th, 2020, uh, in response to the hello, in response to the what's it called, shutdown. Um, we were all kind of lost during the shutdown, and when the shutdown happened, we didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know how to run True. I didn't know what to do with True at that point. But I thought, well, I got a Zoom account, so let's see if anybody wants to join me on Zoom and talk about what we're all going through. So this all started off as a therapy session. Um, Actually, True started as a therapy session 28 years ago, so it's at the heart of what we do. Bring people together to talk about what's going on with them and to find ways of solving their problems and working with each other. Um, so we've been talking a lot about being creative in Zoom and what has sort of been the obstacles and whether people have overcome the obstacles. Some of us have been able to move our programs into Zoom. And we've done virtual presentations and we've done this and that. And we talked about podcasts and radio drama. But we hadn't talked about cast recordings and recordings. And sort of was an obvious thing that I've been wanting to do for a while because I know Van very well. Van and I go back a long time. We predate Broadway Records. We even predate the Broadway, what's it called? The Broadway Consortium?
Yes.
Yeah, we even predate that. We know each other way back. Um, so Van runs Broadway Records, and it's in some ways it's an audio medium, so recordings don't seem to be as vulnerable to a shutdown. On the other hand, recording music virtually with people in isolation is darn near impossible. It's one of the hardest things you can do on Zoom or on virtual platform. Yeah, Zoom has become the new Kleenex. It's it's the Zoom. It's not the virtual platform. It's Zoom. Um, so Van, not to my surprise, because I know you, but as it turns out, you really weren't hindered all that much by the shutdown, were you? You just roared ahead.
Well, I think like a lot of people, we had to find ways to pivot, to the new reality. And we were able to kind of change direction to focus on musicals that weren't necessarily on Broadway or off-Broadway because there were no shows running, but those that were in development or long gestating projects that artists finally had time to focus on, given that everybody was at home and had a bit more time on their hands. So we just facilitated and found ways, different ways for different projects to make them happen. Some of them were easier than others. Like some of them were already were recorded and just needed post-production. So those were the easiest because post-production is quite easy to do in isolation. So certainly any longer gestating projects that had already been recorded could be finished. But we also consulted with an engineer to create recording kits. They're basically self-contained, cases that we sent out that had everything you would need to hook up to a Mac to be able to record yourself. So we had engineers overseeing that.
So
we did
don't rush by that. That's kind of cool and important for people to understand. So one of the ways you were taught to solve the problem of recording in isolation was to create a recording kit. You're saying?
Yes.
And that consisted of?
It's really a microphone with a preamp and, headphones, a pop screen to help with filtering, and, the USB connection so it could go right into the computer. Works best with a Mac, but we would have an engineer walk the vocalist through it. And
so you had expenses. You had to put those packages together. You had production costs.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad though. Each kit we got a good deal. It cost us like $750 or something like that, and we had 5 of them, actually 7 of them that we were sending around.
If people weren't on mute right now, you would have heard gasps. 750 for you may not have been a big deal, but for any of us who are trying to record ourselves or record our own pieces, 750 a pop per performer would be a big budget for us. So,
well, we used it across many projects, so it certainly paid for itself. But
oh, so you would buy it? How many kits did you actually have to buy in total?
I think we had 7. I want to say. So we, we just sent them around on different projects at different times, and we had to keep track of where each of them were.
And then you had to sanitize them after use, right? You had to what?
Well, usually it was a long time between sending it out, because by the time you ship it, take it back, let it sit for a bit, and go back out again, it was usually a few weeks between uses. So, given that the virus was 1 to 3 days on surfaces, depending on the materials, the couple weeks in between, was sufficient.
Okay, so that was one thing you had to learn in order to move into the new world. How about the recording process itself? I mean, when I record my work, I always do individual tracks anyway, and I do a lot of recording of people in isolation. But sometimes you want to bring groups together, but you can't really do that. You can't really have people singing together.
No, I mean, the latency with Zoom and everything, for those who don't know, there's a slight delay. So you can't really sync up to something that's rhythmic very well, just because of the nature of how sound travels. It has, no matter how good the technology is, it's a challenge, to be able to sync up that way. So you can't really do big group numbers together virtually. So it's more on the engineer to piece it together. We did do our Hadestown Holiday Album. We did do that in person.
Yeah, just let me repeat that: the Hadestown, and what was actually it had an interesting title.
Yeah, If the Fates Allow.
If the Fates Allow, Hadestown.
So one of the Fates, Yvette Nasser, had come to me before the pandemic with an idea to do just a couple songs, holiday songs with the Fates. And then I thought about it again in the summer of the pandemic, and I said, well, what if we do a full album of holiday songs and, have the cast kind of work with the Fates, but have the Fates be front and center? So pitched that to the Hadestown producers, and we ended up partnering on that.
So that was Mara Isaacs, and
yes,
who else? Or was it mostly Mara?
Tom Curtihy and Hunter Arnold, etc.
Yeah.
And Mara was my primary partner on it, though she was the day-to-day with me on it. And we did do that in the studio, but we got a massive room at Domena Center and had everybody 12 feet apart with baffling to separate as well. So we were able to do that, made sure everyone, was COVID-free before doing it as well, but they were also quite far apart. Any of the leads were done in individual booths, so they were separated in isolation. But the ensemble and the musicians had to be in quite a large room, but quite far apart.
Well, it sounds relatively complex, actually.
Yeah, it was, but well worth it. And it was I believe the only newly recorded Broadway audio content, during the pandemic.
And when did you do that? When did you do that?
It was last fall, like September, October, when we recorded and did post-production. And
how many total in the cast? And was it everybody? Was it the entire cast, or were there people from the cast who simply weren't available?
I have to check. I think it was the entire cast, because there were a couple who were around the country, so we did that remotely. So that we did either with the kids or in a local studio, close to them. But actually on that one, I don't think we ended up using the kits. I think we just did local studios that were close to them, or I think one had a home studio that they could use. That was the other thing that happened a lot during the pandemic, is a lot of Broadway performers invested in their own home setup. So we didn't need the kit as much as we thought we would, just because a lot of people were buying their own setups, because it was a way to pivot and do voiceovers and other things during that time. Was
it as exact a sound match from system to system, or was there did you have to do a lot of post-production editing?
I mean, there's a bit of post-production editing, but when we did use the kits, we knew what we were getting and it was consistent. when it was home setups, the engineer would work on it to make it sound as seamless as possible.
Was it a challenge though? I would think that it probably would, because of the level that you're producing at. I mean, for the rest of us, if we're doing demos, we can get away with it. But you have a reputation. You have to
Yes.
make it a Broadway Records quality.
Well, some we were more hands-on with others, and certainly the ones we were very hands-on with, then in those cases, we had our engineer working with them every step of the way to make sure it was consistent. I think there was some forgiveness of the fact that some albums, wore it as like a sense of pride that it was all recorded, across 20 locations around the country or whatever, and made sure that was clear in the liner notes, et cetera. So
yeah, it was just the miracle of it. Basically, they're going for the miracle of it. We did this. Oh my God, we did this. Exactly.
So we had 49 releases during the pandemic. Not everyone was, completely overseen by us. Some were given to us finished. There was different levels of involvement that we had.
Well, I'm mostly interested in I'm interested in everything you do, but for this conversation, I'm mostly interested in the things that were recorded post-pandemic, and how you solved the problems and what the different problems were that happened, that came up for each of the projects. I know that you did isolated. You did a thing of people singing at home, a CD, yes. All-star cast of that or something. Tell us a little bit about that. I'm not getting it quite right.
Well, that was conceived by Andrew Girl, who was one of the writers of Meet John Doe, among others, and he kind of led the charge on that. But that was one of the earlier pandemic recordings where that was true rolling up the sleeves. That was even before we had most of the kits.
That was Artists in Residence. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Which is a clever title.
Also Andrew's idea. But yes, he brought that to us, and we thought it was a really great idea, and it gave a lot of writers a chance to reflect on what was happening. And when that was started, we were only a couple months in, so it was very early on. And some beautiful material came out of it, and a lot of great writers participated. So
I'm trying to think. There's so many things that you've done. The one that jumped out at me because it was mentioned in the Times, New York Times, was Jodi Picoult, whose books I have read, decided she wanted to write a musical. I bet there's a good story in that. She wrote the musical with how many different composers and teams or something?
I think there were 6 teams. I'd have to double check, but each team took 3 or 4 songs. They basically little subplots. Each had their own plot that tied together at the end. So each team, would take on one of those and wrote 3 to 4 songs for their section.
It was called Breathe, and each one of the sections had something to do specifically with living in isolation, living in shutdown.
Yes.
Can you tell us who some of the writers were? Do you remember?
Well, Doug Lyons, I know he was mentioned earlier, but he was one of them. Robert Kiki, who wrote The Lightning Thief. There were a lot of amazing writers who were involved, but they each took on the section that kind of meant the most to them. And never say his name right, but one of the writers who was involved with Ratatouille, Daniel. I won't say. Don't want to mispronounce his last name, but okay. He was involved as well.
I wouldn't do any better than you would. So Breathe is an interesting project because it was conceived as a virtual musical, as Zoom musical. It was conceived for virtual presentation, as I recall reading about
yes.
from Jodi. And at what point did they approach you about recording it?
Well, they actually recorded because they did a video production of it as well. So that's one of the ones that we were less involved in. We were more doing the distribution and helping with the marketing and the strategy, as opposed to actually being involved in the recording itself.
Oh, okay. So I was overexcited about that one because I thought, wow, Van's involved with Breathe. Whoa, cool.
Well, we're thrilled to be involved in it, and we went after it aggressively because we really thought it was a great concept and with amazing people involved.
But that's also an interesting thing for people to understand about your business model. I mean, some of the pieces you function mainly as a distributor, and most of what you do, I think you're a creator, you're a co-creator.
Well, it's a mixture. I mean, there's all levels. Some things come to us completely finished, other than maybe packaging, and others, we are there from the beginning. So it's really a whole range.
So tell us about what the difference is in terms of tell us some of the pieces that you were involved in. I know that you're extremely involved in work to help humanity. I mean, you're a philanthropist of sorts, and always trying to raise money for causes. So some of those pieces you initiated. Did you initiate? I know that there were a couple of things that you did during COVID that were. What do you? I'm trying to think of. My brain's not functioning.
Well, Artist in Residence was one of them, but there were a few things. But yeah, we're always trying to find ways to give back. And I know you're referring to in the past, like from Broadway with Love.
Yes.
Also did Broadway for Orlando with Seth and James, and we did during the election we did Broadway for Georgia with Seth and James as well.
Was that Georgia in my mind? Was that you?
Yes.
Wow.
But that was Seth and James kind of brought us in a little bit later in the process on that one. But yes, we were involved in that.
That was spectacular.
Thank you.
So I'm holding off on the last piece of this because I want to talk about the social pivot that we've all had to make, and I want to lead to that. But let's talk about your partnership with New York Theater Barn, because that was what you were sort of getting at earlier when you're talking about the pivot. For you, a lot of the pivot had to be dealing with new works as opposed to the
yes.
quintessential Broadway cast recording of something.
Which also relates to Averno, which you briefly brought up when you were talking about the New York Times coverage and everything.
Yeah.
But yes, the biggest pivot, I guess, well, there were a few, but was focusing on new works during that time because there were no Broadway shows, unfortunately, as we all know, or off Broadway. So
you were already well involved in new artists. I mean, you
yes.
were constantly supporting the Shapiro sisters and other people that were up and coming artists and doing their cast recordings of their shows, of not their Broadway shows, but their cabaret shows or their entertainment evenings. So what had you actually done any new musicals? I think you have.
Oh, many, yeah. But I mean, we definitely did more in the last year than we did in our entire history. That being said, there were at least a few every year that were concept recordings along the way. But last year was, that was the majority. And it was one of those, decisions we made. I mean, some of the other labels in the industry decided to just kind of concentrate on things that they had been working on to complete and then wait for things to come back. And we decided, let's focus on new musicals for this period so that we can still give artists an outlet and still help people to, make money on their recordings and on their work. And so we just focused almost entirely on that. In addition to some strategies that we're working on that I can't necessarily talk about, but that will bear fruit in the future. But one of them that I can is the Theater Barn relationship. So
did Joe approach you or did you approach Joe?
Joe approached me to be on the board. And then I think I forget exactly how the idea of the imprint came up, but basically when I started to look deeper into the work they were doing, I realized there was a lot of overlap of artists that we worked with, plus, and in that sense, I thought they really had their finger on the pulse of great new works. And they were involved with even a few that we hadn't heard of. So I just felt like they could be kind of like our talent scouts in a way, and augmenting what we were already doing. So it seemed like, because they were so immersed in the new musical scene and that they knew it, almost better than anyone, why not join forces and use that as a resource to be able to bring new works out into the world in an earlier stage than maybe we would have before. Their notion was to even do almost like upper scale demos, and I wanted to take it even to like more complete albums. But the idea being that musicals don't always have to wait to be recorded until they're on Broadway or off Broadway. If you do it early enough, it can help the trajectory of the show. And
which is the story. It's an Andrew Lloyd Webber's old routine. He used to do that. He recorded, exactly. I think, a Superstar, Jesus Christ Superstar, and I think also Joseph before they became shows. And
so it's not a new idea. It hasn't been done as much recently, but we felt like there was more room for that, and especially with Spotify, et cetera, it's so easy to discover new works. Like, for example, if Celia Pfeiffer, is on one album you're listening to, then you may then get transferred to something else that she did with us, or it's a way of kind of cross-pollinating. So I think it's a way, for a lot of people to discover new works. And I think Be More Chill proved the power of Spotify. It had more streams than almost any other cast album, and that showed that audience can really make or break a show, or augment what would otherwise be possible. So we just felt that it was a logical extension to get more stuff out there, as long as it's far enough along in its development that it's going to help and not hurt its process. Because you don't want to share a show too early. It needs to be at least at a point where you feel can be frozen at that moment for that recording, and then obviously further development happens. And I think that
it's the same. It's the same consideration that you have to have when you're doing early productions of it. And we've become extremely visible. Theater's become very visible. It's very hard to find a place to develop a show without being under the microscope from the community.
Exactly.
So we're living with it. I think we're just doing it these days. We're just doing it the best we can to get our shows up and out and in front of audiences, and hoping that there isn't going to be some silly blogger in the audience that's going to mess us up for the future. But theater's very delicate. Shows are very delicate things. You were saying something and I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Oh no, but you mentioned Averno earlier. So Averno was a really interesting concept that also occurred last summer, and basically it's the brainchild of Morgan Smith, who actually now works for us too. Morgan is our emerging platforms coordinator, and basically runs our TikTok now. But last summer, they, which is preferred pronoun, came to me with Bitter Summer, which was just released. We kind of went in reverse order just because of the pandemic and what was easier to get done. But we ended up doing Willow as the first release. And Morgan's vision was to create almost like the Marvel universe of musicals, where it's this interconnected shows, and they have dozens, envisioned, that all take place in the same town called Averno. It's a made up town, but it's a community that they've given a really strong backstory to, and
not to be confused with Schmigadoon.
Exactly. And in this case, it's just all the different characters who live in this community that are explored in various stories across many different shows. And it's a multimedia platform too. They intend to do, they have a book that's in process. They're working on potential TV and film. And so it's going to be this whole world, but that musicals are the core, that are all in some way, at least remotely interconnected by the fact that they take place in the same town. And
how many recordings exist of Averno?
So far 3. Willow, Bitter Summer, as I mentioned, and one called Over and Out.
have they had productions, virtual productions or anything? Or do they right now exist as CDs, or do they exist as other forms?
Just digital at the moment, no CD yet. But there are productions that are in discussion and process, and that New York Times article certainly shown a big spotlight on Morgan's work, which has led to a lot of interest.
I guess I want to go to the pivot. Basically, in addition to COVID and dealing with shutdown, we've also had to really been forced to look at things about our country that many of us were aware of on a level, but it was never as visceral as it's been. It's the Black Lives Matter, and it's the whole political furor that we're the divided states of America right now. But inclusivity has become tantamount for all of us. I mean, every not-for-profit has to be really conscious of it and aware of it. And we're trying to find useful things to do to show our appreciation of BIPOC population and just the non-white population. And you have one thing that you're sort of working on right now that I think hits on that naturally.
Yes. Well, it's something that I think can make a real difference in that issue in this conversation. It's called Black Writers Amplified, and we're partnering with Black Theater Coalition on this. And what Black Theater Coalition is trying to do is create fellowships and other opportunities for professionals or future professionals of color to be able to learn the trade, because one of the issues with Broadway is and the theater in general is it's very insular in the sense that people tend to work with who they know, which I understand the sentiment of wanting to work with people you get along with, et cetera, but it keeps it a little bit of a closed system in a way.
But the trouble is like attracts like, and it winds up excluding others.
Yes.
And the whole principle of like attracting like, I think we have to break through and just be more open to the other people that are not like us.
So the notion of what they're doing and what we're doing in a different way with Black Writers Amplified is they're creating opportunities for people, who want to learn stage management or general management or design, become a designer, or anything basically across the Broadway spectrum of professions, and set up fellowships and paid opportunities where they can study, and work along the experts and be paid for their time in doing it, and learn and be able to be that part of that next wave of talent. Because it affects all aspects, like I said, stage management, general management, producers. There are very few producers of color. It's getting a little bit better, but it needs to make much greater strides.
Right, there's 7 now instead of 6.
Yeah, so it got a ways to go. And on the writer side, I, like everyone, didn't realize how many writers of color there are out there, because they're not always easy to find, just because they haven't had the opportunities that they should. So our notion developed together with Black Theater Coalition and with Jarrett Murray, who came to me with a slightly different idea that then evolved into this, was what if we create an album of up and coming writers of color who maybe people haven't heard of, and then also putting in some writers that maybe you have heard of. So it has a whole cross section. But the idea being that if we have one album that we're going to send to every artistic director and every producer in the country, in addition to making it available for purchase, then no one has the excuse anymore saying, oh, well, I don't know how to find writers of color. Now we're going to give them an album of 24 songs that are amazing by all different writers of color. It's kind of giving, a really strong resource. And so if an artistic director is listening to this album, they can say, well, I really like this piece, I don't want to develop it, or I love this writer, but I have this other piece that I want to create. Maybe I can commission this writer to work on that. So it really makes it easy, because I feel like, maybe I'm an optimist, but everybody wants to do the right thing. They don't always know how. By giving them this resource and saying, here's, 24 writing teams that are all incredible that maybe you don't know most of them, but you should.
Most of the people we know want to do the right thing. Not everybody wants to do the right thing. We have a
True.
country full of people who do not want to do the right thing.
Well, that is true, but I like to think
the right thing is different from what we think.
I like to think that within the theater community, at least, we tend to be more introspective and I would like to think that there's that sentiment, but I do think that if we give that resource and it's out there, that it takes away the barrier to finding the talent. And, the album's going to include, profile on each writer, information about the show. So it's really giving everybody a tremendous resource. And to me, that was the way, because, we don't want to wait another 10 or 20 years until there's, more equality in terms of opportunity. This is a way of like jumpstarting that and saying, here's, again, 24 writing teams that should be given opportunities now.
And the moment is amplified by the fact that a young Black guy won a Pulitzer Prize for theater, for drama last year. So
exactly.
That doesn't hurt. But it shows that we're awakening, at least. I'm not sure if we're awake, but we're awakening. There's a lot more to talk about with this, and I'm going to actually probably get some questions from the audience. Guys, if you want to ask questions or make comments, put them into the chat or do a virtual hand raise, just so I know that you have something to add to what we're saying. What I was starting to say earlier, I forgot before I switched over to the inclusivity aspect of what you're doing. Joe and Jen were guests of ours in January. I don't know when it was. They were like proud as could be, and they were boasting about their new relationship with Broadway Records. But wasn't one of the first things that you did for them a compilation of very, very young, like 14 and 15 and 16-year-old writers?
Well, it wasn't so much compilations, but we did new musicals like Frankie, that was written by extremely young writer, and The Perfect Fit. That was a 13-year-old writer on that one. And then, Averno with Willow, I think, goes by Abigail Greenwood, who now goes by August Greenwood, I believe was 16 when it came out.
Wow.
So that was, something that happened this year that hadn't really happened before. We had three major albums that we had come out that were all by writers under 18.
Yeah, that sort of stuck in my mind. When did those albums? When did you start with those albums? When did your relationship with Theater Barn actually officially start?
Last summer. So basically, with Willow, that was already gestating before the relationship happened, but we thought it would be a great first album to do with them because of the focus on new musicals that were earlier on in the process.
So we've covered a lot. I'm just looking to see if there are any questions in here.
While you're looking too, I was going to say that it was a weird year in the sense that, in many senses, but for us, it was actually the most releases we've ever had, which is odd to have that in the middle of the pandemic. But with 49, it was not only our most, but we think the most of any theater label in history, we believe, based on our research. And it's strange to have that all happen in the time of the pandemic, but I think a lot of it was because of that pivot to focusing on new musicals. There's just so much material out there.
When you produce an album, a concept album, or an album of somebody young with a new work, it must cost less than when you're doing an original cast recording, because original cast recording requires a certain level of perfection. How big are the musical ensembles? Are you not using full orchestra with these, or are you?
No, well, except for In the Light, which just came out, Michael Mott's new musical, that actually used a full orchestra from Europe. That was so that's an exception, but it's usually much more modest. But it can vary. I mean, we did recording of Secondhand Lines that had a pretty large band, and there's been a few others. So it's really whatever the writers want and what can be afforded in the budget. But concept recordings can be anywhere from 10 to 20,000 all the way up to 50 or more $1,000. I mean, we've seen them go as high as $100,000, but those are really ambitious ones that, are full scale.
Hey, my concept album for my show, Everybody's Getting Into the Act, which I did back in about 10 years ago, total cost was about $40,000.
Yeah, that's pretty typical.
Yeah. So there are a couple of questions. I want to start with Jane's business question, because we're a business organization. What are the chances of recouping on concept albums? Let's not talk about chances, but let's say, what are your expectations when you do a concept album? How often do you break even? How often do you recoup?
Well, it's early to say on the ones from the last year, and last year has been our most concept album, heavy focus that we've ever had. In the past, I mean, really, concept recordings are more about the future of the show and helping the show than they are about making money. Most of them don't recoup, although again, there's not enough data, based on the ones from last year. I will say the Averno ones either have or will, at least our investments in them. But they also were done very low budget. I mean, the cash outlays were, in the below $10,000 range, because a lot of people did it, for equity, because it was a group of friends. They said, well, we just want to do this. And then we helped them structure a setup where we said, okay, you did this role. If you had been paid to do that, you would have made X. So you now have 5%, whatever the percentage is, in equity in the album. So those who originally went into it thinking they were just doing it as a favor of a friend or for the fun of it, ended up getting a piece of ownership in the album, but they hadn't been paid because they were doing it as a project amongst friends. And when it came to us, we said, okay, let's structure this like a business, give everybody equity who participated.
Well, let's move to a different use of that word. Let's talk about what union do you have to deal with for these agreements?
Well, if it's a concept recording or studio recording, unless you're, using union musicians, you don't necessarily have to go union, because if it's not associated with a union contract on Broadway or off Broadway, then you have more flexibility. If you're on a union contract, and even like 54 Below is a union venue, then you have to go union. But if it's not a union contract, then you're more open in your options.
But an equity actor can sing a song on a CD, and just negotiate whatever they can with the producer.
Correct.
Because the people that sang on my CD did not get paid a lot. I didn't.
We try to use like SAG-AFTRA rates, as a guideline. So whenever we're creating budgets, that's where we start. Most of the time, that's where we end as well. Sometimes it even goes over that, but we figure if we're going under their rates, then because it's, then it's a fair wage and everybody's happy. So we use those rates as a guideline. And same even on the musician side, we tend to use those rates as a guideline, so that we're making sure everyone's getting paid fairly.
So let's go past the recouping on concept albums, which is a difficult concept in and of itself. Let's talk about the CDs that you produce. What is your business model in that? I mean, how much distribution do you have, and what percentage of the CDs that you produce do break even or make a profit? I mean, I'm hoping some. But it's a tough business.
It is. I mean, our business model is a bit different in that. I mean, we do get an industry standard label percentage on everything, and that's where we, make the money. Plus, we have staff working on it. Like our designer does all the packaging, so we charge against sales, but we don't charge up front for that. But we do get a piece against sales to cover our cost. So it helps, cover our employees' time. But we only charge what it costs us, so we're not making a profit on that. But it at least covers the time that it takes. But it's, we do it to have a full catalog, and so that it's helping the industry. Obviously, we're a business, so we are trying to, make our nut by, first of all, some of them doing hopefully very well, and then even the ones that don't, we get a little something from. which all adds up when you do enough of it, because we have about 250 albums now.
Oh, 250 in your catalog?
About 250 albums.
Wow. Okay. How do I ask this? What percentage of the albums that you produce actually, what is the average number of sales of a CD for any given album average? Then you can tell me about, which of the ones that you have in your catalog are the best sellers.
I mean, it varies so much from cast albums to solo albums, etc. I mean, our best selling solo album is Ahrens of 8, which did, I think 10,000 units like in the first weekend, but that's rare. But
put this in perspective of the pop music business. I mean, we're looking at 100,000 to 500,000 for them to even be noticed in the pop world.
Yes, and that's the high end for like a theater related solo album, I think, these days. I think, it can range anywhere from a few hundred copies to, a few thousand for the average album. The big Broadway ones do a lot more than that, of course. I mean, we consider a successful Broadway album from our perspective being at, say, 20,000 units up to 100,000 units. So it
yeah, well, you don't remember, before you were born, original cast albums actually had a much bigger market share than they do today.
Yeah, no, it's a very different business than it was, 20 years ago. But yeah, and then, our biggest albums are like, I would say, are Matilda and Anastasia. As far as sales, those are among the high end.
And what is your financial input on releasing an album? On those, were you a distributor, or you were the producer of the album, or the studio for the album? I mean, what is your role?
Everyone's different. I mean, there's certainly different tranches that we fall in, depending on the project. But Matilda, we were very much leading everything on that, including the fundraising. Anastasia, because they knew, what they had and they wanted to fund it themselves, we kind of co-managed it with them. So we did a lot of legwork, but so did they, meaning the production, which I also was a producer of the show, but I wasn't, I was working with the lead producers of the show on the album. So they were pretty involved. I mean, we helped considerably, so we were pretty much partnering on all the decisions, and but they found the money on that one. We were not raising money on it.
Okay. RK, you have a question. RK Green.
Hey man, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Good to see you.
You too.
Was kind of interested to get your take on how an album or a collection of songs might be able to promote and develop a theater project.
Absolutely.
Any particular reason why you're asked that question, RK?
No. Just off my top of my head.
Off the top of your head, yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah, all right.
And it goes back to things like Les Miserables way back in the day, right? I think they had an album out before they even had a production.
The concept album has been a hugely successful tool for getting a show into production for a few shows, not for all. But when it works, it really works wildly well.
Exactly.
Or wildly well.
Yeah, we work with Frank quite a bit too. But yes, it's I think it's an invaluable tool. And I mean, a lot of people spend money on demos when for a few dollars more, they can actually release it and then have, way more exposure. So I'm always a fan that as long as it's at a point artistically where they feel it's ready to share, of just going and releasing it, because then you get a lot more cheerleaders and supporters in your corner, following the trajectory of the show and helping, it happen. And certainly theaters, if they're looking at taking on new work, if there's an album, that's attractive. Obviously for licensing, it's critical for a show to live on. to have an album. Not that a lot of shows are licensed without having at least Broadway or off Broadway, but there are some. But an album is critical for a show to really live on and get licensed.
I have a question for you. How do you explain the extraordinary success of Be More Chill before it became a production?
I believe
Any thoughts?
Tumblr, among other social media platforms, I know there was a lot of chatter there about it, and sometimes things just catch on, and it's word of mouth, and both literally and also social media wise.
Did it actually revolve around Michael in the bathroom, or were there?
That was the key song. Yeah,
That was the key song, wasn't it?
Yeah,
unbelievable.
And it, and for us, I mean, we have some composer albums that we always thought were wonderful, but didn't necessarily get the attention we thought they deserved when they first came out. But then years later on streaming, they got rediscovered and got a lot more traction, and actually ended up recouping quite a few years after they came out.
You wanted to say some titles? I'm curious.
Well, one is Drew Gasparini's album, Could Use a Drink, which, and now he's becoming, quite successful, just, deservedly so. But it's a great album, and yet did not do what we thought it should in the beginning. But it's got a new life on streaming that's really taken off.
So much of this business is so mysterious. Everybody has perfectly good rules and regulations and things to do and ways to do it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It's a crazy business. It's just a crazy business.
It's true. I know with Be More Chill, Kurt would be one of the first ones to tell you that he didn't predict that it would be what it was. It wasn't taken on because they thought, oh, this is going to have hundreds of millions of streams.
Yeah, really, just amazing. It still I mean, it didn't do well on Broadway. It was very popular off Broadway because its core audience was there supporting it then. But it had a little bit more of a trouble when it got to Broadway. Well, that's another conversation. Let's go back. Let's go back to Broadway Records and COVID and the shutdown and how you survived so beautifully over the past 15 months. I mean, congratulations. I mean, it's amazing.
Thank you.
That you really. It really sounds like you've just done extraordinary. It sounds like the shutdown didn't even make a dent in your business.
Well, it definitely caused a pivot, as I said, and we're looking forward to be able to do Broadway and off Broadway shows again. Which is already, those conversations are already starting. So it's nice to see things kind of springing back to life. But that being said, I think the new musical side is always going to be really important, and I think the last year showed us how much great material there is out there. So it's been wonderful to see that.
Well, good for you. I'm just proud that you just did so great, and you pivoted and you got this. Which was the show that you said you did a live recording with everybody socially distanced? Which was
Hadestown, the Hadestown Holiday Album.
And have you done any others that way, or was that the one?
That was really the only one of that scale.
That's very complicated. So congratulations on doing that.
Thank you.
Let's go to some of the questions, the ones that I'm sure you're expecting. What would be the best way to contact you about the possibility of recording a concept album for a new show? What information would you need from a writer to interest you? Why would you be interested?
A lot of people end up actually writing on our website on BroadwayRecords.com. If you go to the contact page, I think you would just want to do your elevator pitch about why we should be interested, and then maybe Dropbox link or something like that to hear some material. We will say, because we have trimmed back a little bit this year, because last year doing 49 was a lot on our whole team, so we have cut back a little bit. But that being said, we're always looking for really great material to help bring out into the world.
Can I say, I'm going to say on behalf of Larry, who's asking the question, Larry's musical is about an issue that is very near and dear to you. It's about gun control. Larry, I think if you do a pitch to Van, understand that Van is very passionate about that issue. Very passionate about that issue. I won't go into specifics, but it's heartbreaking. Um,
Thank you.
if a songwriter playwright, okay, Maureen says if a songwriter playwright has all the tools for her musical recorded in Pro Tools and just needs the final mix and distribution and packaging, would you be interested in working with that, or what would interest you about that? Is there a way that is there something that she could offer you that would make you interested?
I would, I mean, I would have to hear the material. We certainly have engineers who can complete a work that hasn't been completed yet, especially, you know, if it was recorded well. So that's the technical side is no problem at all. It's just a matter of if it's something that, you know, our team would listen to and you know, want to put in our catalog. So we would have to hear it to make that assessment.
Okay.
Also, I saw some notes come by about Tumblr and TikTok. I made the point about Tumblr about being more chill. It's not as popular now, but it did have a big impact on being more chill. And the TikTok conversation is important too, because you know, there's been a number of musicals, you know, that have been discovered that way. You know, obviously Ratatouille, yes, and the Averno universe actually got a lot of its success and notoriety from TikTok, and that helped bring it on our radar. So it's definitely an exciting way. There are a couple other shows that we're looking at, you know, recordings for too that we found on TikTok. So it's a unique way and exciting way to discover new material, and certainly anyone who is writing who can find, you know, their way into TikTok should do it. It's a very complicated algorithm and it's not easy to become popular on TikTok, but if you can work your way through that, that can work very well. That's why we have a TikTok specialist on staff now too, because that gives us the expertise to figure out the algorithms and how best to work within that.
I gotta ask, how many people on your staff these days?
6, so we doubled over the last year.
Robbie's still with you?
Yes.
Okay, tell him I said hi.
I will.
Jane Dubin also wants to know, who do you consider your competitors, and do you think that you have an advantage over any of them? And if you do, what would that be? What do you do well that your competitors don't do as well?
Well, our closest competitor, I guess, is Ghostlight, you know, which is now owned by Warner. And I say closest because they're the most active next to us, and they're the most like us, I guess, in terms of the types of stuff that we do. That being said, our entire staff is like immersed in live, eat, and breathe theater. So we all know that that landscape really well. And when a producer wants to figure out the strategy for their show, because I've produced many shows on Broadway, because our whole team, you know, works in that world. Our new director of marketing has marketed 200 Broadway and off-Broadway shows in the past. So we have kind of that deep expertise within theater, whereas, you know, some of the competitors, they do other things too. So they're not necessarily solely focused on theater, and they don't necessarily, although, I mean, there's variations, like Sony's starting to produce in theater too. They were involved with SpongeBob. So I mean,
that's a big competitor.
Yeah. So, you know, there's different levels, but you know, Sony does.
Did you partner with Time Warner at one point? Did you partner with Time Warner, or am I
Well, I did an album with them before I started Broadway Records, but
is that what it was?
Okay. Broadway Records has partnered with Sony on 3 recordings. Yeah, so we like them a lot. They have a different focus. I mean, they only do between 2 and 6 recordings a year on Broadway, because they also do classical and other genres. Atlantic tends to do 1 or 2 a year. That's why I said Ghostlight was the closest, because they do, you know, typically 1 to 2 dozen a year. So they're you know, very active in the space.
So when you want a show, you have to really go after it hard. You have to really be aggressive to get in there.
Yes. And you know, you win some and you lose some, and you just put your best offer forward, and you figure out what you can do to differentiate yourself.
Okay, I'll ask a Barbara Walters question. What is the one that got away that you wish you had been able to produce?
There were a few, but the Band's Visit was one that we
Band's Visit. Oh, that would be so right for you.
Thank you. And actually, Hadestown, we came very close on that too, but there was a prior deal in place that had to be honored. So, we didn't get that one either. But those are two that got away that we would have loved to have had.
You have a pretty long list of shows that you have recorded, though. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I think everybody in the room is kind of eager to meet you, and I think that we have probably a dozen people in here who are dying to send you their concept CDs. So I hope you don't get bombarded by it, but you are open to it. It sounds like at least you've actually made yourself sound open to it. So
yes, we are open to it. Obviously, we can't promise until we hear the material, and it may take a moment to get back because we're quite busy. But we definitely want to explore new musicals wherever possible.
I can tell everybody in the room that Van is one person who's absolutely going to give you a fair listen. He's going to be very, very fair when he listens to it. And there's also going to be business considerations when he makes a decision about something like that as well. Come back to something I said before. It's a tough business. It's a very tough business.
It is.
And it's really one of the most biggest shrinking businesses that we have. That it's not near published. It's not as shrinking as publishing is, but original cast recordings really has become a very difficult business. I'm looking to see whether there's other. Did you put your email in the chat? Can I share your email with people, or is there a special email that I would share with them?
Well, it's probably better to go through the website because then my staff will see it too. It's less, because I get hundreds of emails a day and I don't want it to get lost.
Well put, well said. Michael DiCatano asks a aesthetic question. Do people want to see issue musicals or want to be entertained? At this moment in time, what is your? You can only have an opinion. You can't really know the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a producer on Jagged Little Pill, which, by the way, is another album that got away that I would have loved to have done. But I'm a producer on the show, and I think it's really hard to say. I don't think anybody knows for sure what everyone's going to want coming out of this. But I mean, I certainly feel good musicals, I think, will have some edge because people want to take their mind off of how difficult the last year was. But that being said, I think important topics, will always have a place. And I think a show like Jagged Little Pill certainly deals with a lot of topics really well. So I'm hoping that they'll be as successful, if not more than they were even before. But I don't think anybody knows the true answer about exactly what everyone's looking for. And this is kind of unprecedented, the fact that all the shows are going to come back within a couple month period, starting from nothing to suddenly having, 30, 40 shows running.
0 to 100 in 10 seconds.
Exactly. So it's really unprecedented. So I don't think anybody knows exactly what that's going to look like. But certainly there's a hunger for great theater. And I think that people are going to be thrilled to be going back to it.
I saw a survey last year. It may have changed since then, where in DC they were doing a survey of theater goers in terms of what they would most like to see when theater reopens, and they did not lean towards the escapist. They wanted to see real stuff. They wanted to see stuff that would help them process what they've been through. They wanted to see the issues dealt with, but that was just one survey. I don't think there's any one answer. I think that depends on the audience. There's many audiences out there. Let's see. Okay, the website is BroadwayRecords.com.
Yes.
BroadwayRecords.com. It's pretty simple. BroadwayRecords.com.
And there's a contact page, so can submit that way. And like I said, please include a link, Dropbox or otherwise, or SoundCloud, whatever you have that will work.
So one thing that we kind of glossed over, how many post-COVID CDs actually have you produced? Not ones that came to you that were just ready for distribution, but ones that you've actually been involved in the process.
Haven't actually counted, but
A lot.
at least half the number we were involved in, more than just distributing, and maybe more.
And other than Hadestown Holiday, if the fates allow, all of them were recorded in isolation, and you were, in many cases, providing them with kits so that their sound would be somewhat equal from isolated room to isolated room. But some of them also use their own kits. So everything has been recorded in isolation.
Not everything, because there were some that were recorded before and then were just post-production occurred during the pandemic. So
That's what I was saying. I was trying to take those out of the equation.
Right. That was the first few months of the pandemic. We were finishing up things that had already been started. But then once we got into the heat of the summer, that's when new projects were getting recorded in isolation.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we're clear about that. Everybody in the room, raise hands, ask questions. I mean, a couple more minutes.
Well, there were a bunch that came through in chat. They went by too quickly.
A lot of them had to do with TikTok, and you talked a little bit about TikTok. Is Tumblr helpful? The answer is yes.
One asked.
I didn't know this. Jane just told me that you hired UI Zell for marketing. I didn't know that.
Yes, he's our director of marketing as of last October.
So he's one of your 6?
Yes.
He's one of the holy 6. Okay. Send him my love too.
I will.
Okay, so Jane also wants to know how you market your catalog.
Most of it is social media and press, because traditional marketing that you pay for, we've tried in many ways, but because the margin is so small on albums, it usually doesn't pay to do it that way. I mean, one of our most successful albums, Anastasia, everything was done organically, and it's done extremely well, but we didn't have to spend many dollars on actual paid marketing. For us, it's about press, it's about social media opportunities, it's about the more organic stuff that really is effective. We have had albums where we did throw $30,000 in marketing or even more, and it doesn't seem to move the needle anymore, and maybe not even as much as the channels I just mentioned. And somebody else asked about our distribution channels. I mean, there's about 35 or so digital retailers. Some of them you all have heard of course, iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube, etc. But there's many others around the world that are also, in that list of 35, and it keeps expanding as get access to more. Plus on the physical side, any brick and mortar stores, that still carry musical CDs, have access to our recordings.
Them, huh?
Yeah, there are many, unfortunately, but and then obviously Amazon.com is a big source for us as well. We have everything there. And our website, we sell quite a bit directly off our website.
Jeffrey Lyle Siegel asked a question that I think I could rephrase it, but he says, do you look for music specifically in a contemporary idiom or a score with songs that tell a story in whatever style? I assume that you don't have, what you do have a personal preference, I would say, but I think you do scores that just work.
Yeah, I mean, it's about the artistic and commercial potential. I mean, I've always tried to marry art and commerce, but it's really just about, does it work within what it's trying to achieve? And, do I think other people will want to hear it? And do we think it will do enough, that it makes sense to invest the time that we're going to have to invest in making it happen? But it's not there's no criteria saying it has to be this style or this anything. We have a pretty large variety of things that we've released in terms of genre and style.
Larry wants to know that if do you know the make and model number of the microphone that was in the kit you sent to the actors?
I believe they were Audio Technica USB mics. I don't remember the model number.
Okay. And Patricia Zantmer wants to know what makes a recording more than a demo?
it's really just being polished. I mean, certainly it should be mastered, but it should just be really well mixed. I mean, just something that you could and would want to hear, you know, because I think even though not everyone's an audiophile, you can tell the difference if something isn't like fully completed in terms of its post-production.
Well, let's start with some basics. I mean, a basic demo is usually piano, maybe piano bass drums. It doesn't really have a full orchestra. When you get into a recording, depending what the show is, you may start putting in additional instruments. You may have 20 pieces or 30 pieces. That was actually, I started off, my CD was originally a demo, and well, it was a demo with all-star cast. And when I got somebody who was ready to distribute it, when I had a label that was on board to distribute it, they asked me to go back and re-record everything with live instrument tracks. A lot of demos use synth, and you probably will move from synth to at least some live playing when you're going to be doing a real cast album.
Yeah,
and that's actually that bumped my CD up from about 16,000 to about 40,000, so with all of the orchestrations, and we did full orchestra, and I wrote my own arrangements. I still can't believe I did that. That's thrown fantastic. Into it. I was thrown into it, and I had to do it, so I had to figure it out like within hours. It's like we're going into the studio the next day, and I had to sit down at my computer and figure out how to write a flute part and a violin part and a saxophone and everything. The only thing I couldn't figure out was how to write a rhythm part. I don't know how to do drums, percussion. So I mean that's one of the things you have to be prepared for if you're going to be thinking in terms of an actual professionally produced, commercially released CD.
There are rare cases though where we'll release it even with just piano, like Ahrens and Flaherty's Legacy. It was recorded 17 years earlier, originally as a demo, but we had it re-engineered to make it more polished. But it was just, with the exception of one track, it was just piano.
Jeffrey Siegel, did you want to say something else? I see your hands raised.
No, I don't. Thank you, Bob.
Oh, I covered your question already. Okay. So I'm just going to wait and see if anybody else's hand goes up, and it's not. So I'm going to assume that we can release you to your life. You can go back and have dinner or something exciting like that. Van, we're old friends, and I'm very proud of I've watched you go from a first-time producer to Tony Award winner and guy that created Broadway Records, an innovator in many ways and a humanitarian in even more ways. So you're amazing. You're just amazing, and I'm so glad to have you as a friend. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
And go.
I was going to say thank you for everything you do and for creating TRU, which was, extremely important in getting my career off the ground.
Well, I'm glad we were there, and I always think of myself as somebody who just presents opportunities. I just lay out create an environment, and the rest is up to you guys. So thanks to all of you who took advantage of the environment and have made me proud. That also includes Jane Dubin and others in the room as well.
And speaking of Jane Dubin, and a plug for the PDMP, where Van and I met years ago, and started us off. So yay, TRU.
That's to the room. Basically, the PDMP program has a couple of stars, and two of them are here today, Van and Jane, I'm just glad to be useful in the world. I mean, God knows. I mean, we've come to this planet. What are we here for? Hopefully, we're here to help people and to be useful. So, thanks.
You absolutely do.
So that's it. Philosophy tale, sort of ending this little discussion today. And now we go from philosophy to commerce, which is just a reminder that everybody that although we welcome you for free, if you're not a member, we do ask you to give some sort of donation if you can. And if you want to donate and you want to keep supporting us, don't let me stop you, as I always say. But it's trudonate.com, trudonate.com. I'm working on next week, and I'm working on the weeks to come. One way or the other, I'm going to be here next Friday. I don't know who's going to be with me. I'm open to your suggestions as well. My YouTube viewers, this is where I say thank you for being with us, and I hope I'll see you again.